Hello my fellow gnomes, welcome to episode 4 of Dead Rails. Now we have our working train, but if we want to put something on it, such as some cargo like these blocks I've added in, well, we've got no way of adding them at the moment, right? I can click them as much as we like, but nothing is going to happen. So let's add that functionality. So you can see at the moment there's these 3 parts, and I've named them coal, gold bar, and pottery. You can see them all here. Now, they're just completely normal parts. They're not anchored. And so in theory, they should be able to move around. But we just need to control that. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is we need to know where our mouse in the game is pointing. So let's add a local script to do this job into starter character scripts. And we can name this something like drag system. And if we get the user input service, and we also want run service, because we want to check every frame using the heartbeat event, we can get their mouse position. And then using that, we can draw a sort of imaginary 3D line from our mouse's position in 2D space and work out what it would hit in the 3D world. So just the same as when we're inside Studio. And even though my mouse is only my mouse, rather, is only moving in 2-dimensional space, as soon as it hovered over something, then a part is highlighted. And that's really what we want to sort of do in the game. So in order to do that, we're going to need to create a ray. So if we get the current camera, and we can use a handy method, viewport point to ray. And for the X value, we supply mouse position dot X. And then mouse position dot Y. For the Y value, if I zoom out, you can see that full line. And then I'm going to create some raycast params. I'm going to make this a blacklist or exclude list, as it's now called. This just means that we can tell it to ignore certain things. So if I now say raycast params dot filter descendants instances, I can supply a table. So I'm just going to ignore our own character. We should probably get the player to do this. And the local player, and then we can say player, character, and we can just get all the descendants, which is going to give us a table anyway. So it's just going to ignore any sort of weird collisions on ourselves, right? We don't want to accidentally touch ourselves. We're only interested in what other parts we can grab. So now we've defined some parameters, we can go ahead and actually create our raycast. So we can call the workspace.raycast method. The origin is that ray that we just set up. So ray.origin and then ray.direction. And we're going to multiply this by the maximum distance. So I could create a variable up at the top, max distance that you're able to pick up an item from. Let's say 25 studs. That seems reasonable. So multiply it by 25 studs. And then finally, we need to add in these raycast params. And once we've done that, we can check what result we have. So before we do anything else, let's just print out the result and see if this code is all working for us so far. So if I play the game, I go into first person and I'm looking up at the sky, it's going to be nil because I am not hitting anything. And if I start to look down towards the base plate, we can now see I am starting to get all the base plate information and the position that I'm hitting. And if I go to one of these parts, I now see coal in the output, telling me that I'm hovering over coal, over the gold bar, and over the pottery part, over the spawn location, and even over all the bits of the train track, the rail and the sleeper. Cool, so we know that bit's working. We probably want to go and lock in ourselves for first person while we're here. So if we go starter player camera mode and we just select lock first person, that means now we are going to be locked in. Cool. So the next thing I want to do is keep track of which object I am highlighting. So if we create something called target, initially that's going to be equal to nil. And then let's check if we have a result and we have result.instance, and maybe we should check if it's actually a part that we can pick up. So obviously we can't pick up the base plate or the train or anything. So to do this, I'm going to select all of my parts And if we go to tags, I'm going to add in a new tag. We could call this grabbable, or if we like, we could create one called draggable. I would think I prefer draggable actually, since we call it the drag system. Helps to keep these things consistent. So then we can check, and if the result.instance has the tag of draggable, which these three parts do, then we're going to take some notice. So let's create a little function for ourselves called highlight object. And we're going to make use of the highlight Roblox object. So if we add in the highlight as a child of the script, I'm going to get rid of fill transparency. So set that to 1. And later on, I'm going to introduce a billboard as well. But for now, let's just try script.highlight. And we use the adorny property to attach it to an object. So we're going to attach it to an object that's going to be supplied to this function. So it's just a one-line function at the moment, but we'll build that out in a moment. And let's say that if all of this is true, then that target is equal to result.instance and highlight object with the target. But else, if we don't have any of that, then we will set the highlight back to nil, to nothing, and reset our target as well. We can even remove that print now. So let's see, we're now playing the game. We go up to a part, and we should see the little white outline appears around all of them now when I hover over. And if I hover over the train or anything else, they're not going to get highlighted. Only my 3 parts with the draggable tag. Cool. So now let's add a little bit more information that tells the player what they're actually hovering over. So let's add in a billboard GUI. And we want it to always be on top. We're going to have a text label inside of this. We probably want it to be a little bit bigger. So let's try making it 3.50, 3.50, which will mean it'll kind of scale. So if we're close to the part, it'll look big. But if we're far away, it's not going to get any bigger. Cool. So then let's make sure that everything is in alignment with that. So we'll have a txt name, and we'll make that 10.30, something like that. So it just takes up the top part. We'll set the font to something that looks cool, maybe this one. Scale up the text and disable the background on it. Maybe add in a little UI stroke of white to make it a little bit easier to read while we're here. And then if we want it to appear a little bit like off to the side of the object, for instance, we could set a studs offset of, say, 1 on the x-axis, just so it's slightly to the side. I think that sometimes looks a little bit better. You can do what you like with all these properties, of course. But now we've got our billboard. Let's drag that into our script. And now we can start to add some more detail to the player. So let's add a little UI, which is the script.billboard GUI. And if we do have some object information, then we can say our txt name.text is equal to whatever the object's name is. And obviously we need to enable the UI as well. So that's enabled is going to be whether we want to turn this off or not. Let's have an enable billboard property too. And obviously the UI.adorny is the same thing. It's going to be that object. So now when we call the highlight thing, let's make sure we set that to true as well to display its name. So now let's see if I go with my gold bar. I see gold bar above it. I see pottery, coal. Cool. So everything's getting displayed to me and it's now nice and clear, but I want to be able to drag things. So in order to do that, we're going to use some Roblox constraints. We're going to use some more attachments. So let's add an attachment into the terrain that we're going to call drag target, I guess. And I'll show you if we add an attachment inside of the coal and if we run the game and let's say we add in align position object, attachment 0 to the attachment and the attachment 1 to the drag target. When we do that, it's going to start trying to move towards it. And if I move this drag target around, it's going to change where the part tries to move to. Okay. So if we line up this attachment with where the player is looking, then we can drag this part around. Cool. So into my script, I'm going to add a align position, and we can also add an align orientation for good measure just to help stabilize things. And then in our drag system script, we can go and we can get the drag target attachment, which is equal to workspace terrain drag target. And then inside of our run service heartbeat, we can set the world C-frame to be equal to a target CF, let's say current camera again, .C-frame, and let's just offset it by, say, -5 studs. And if we set that to that, what we should be able to see when we play the game now is that attachment, if we make sure we have the constraint details visible. And that's a bit confusing because you can see all of the constraints inside of my body. But you should be able to see as I'm moving that sort of green one moving just in front of my mouth, in between the rest of the body parts. Let's end this slightly Kafkaesque nightmare of all my bone joints being visible as green dots. And let's go about actually connecting this attachment up. So we've got a target. Now we need to keep track of what we're actually grabbing. So initially that's going to be nil. And then when we click on something, we want to see if we can grab it. So let's use the user input service.input began, connect that into a function, and the two parameters are its input and whether it's already been processed. Now we're just going to set it up for PC initially. So let's just say if the input.user input type equals enum.user input type dot mouse button 1. Or we could say if it does not equal that, then return end and exit out of this. But otherwise, let's check if we have a target, if we're looking at something in the heartbeat and we're not grabbing something else. Maybe we should rename this to grabbed object just to be a little bit clearer. And we don't have a grabbed object, then we can go ahead and make our grabbed object to be the target. And if we don't, then we'll want to drop that object. We could probably create a little function for this, drop object, and that would be setting this to nil and setting our align orientation attachments to nil as well as the align position. And then we can call that drop object function. And then also, if the input suddenly ends, using the input ended event, we can connect that to a function. Again, it takes input and processed. Now, if it's been processed elsewhere, such as they've entered into the in-game chat, then return then, ignore it. And again, if it's not the mouse button, then we'll ignore it too. But otherwise, we will drop that object again. But now inside of our heartbeat loop, which is running every frame, we want to update the position of our attachment and make sure it is attached to the object. So let's say if we have a grabbed object, then we'll do some stuff. Else, let's do all of this stuff with the targeting we were doing before. Now, I don't want to have to go and manually add in an attachment into every part with the draggable tag. That's kind of annoying. So I'm just going to delete this attachment. And instead, I'm going to add them inside of my script. So let's look, see if one exists. So this is me looking inside to see if there is one. And if there's not a drag attachment, then we can just create one. So instance.new attachment, and we'll make its name equal to drag attachment. And we can parent it to set the name, but we were going to parent it to the grabbed object. And then we just set our align orientation and position properties to be equal to the drag attachment. Now we know that we definitely have one. And we probably want to keep highlighting it as well. So I'm going to call my highlight object function supplying the grabbed object, but I probably don't need the text telling us about its information. So it'll be false for the second value. So now let's try playing that. We go up to it and we click, nothing's happening. Let's just see, have we set up our attachment properly? Oh no, we need to make sure that the attachment 1 for both of these is set to that drag target. So let's manually set that up. Attachment 1 to the drag target. There we go. Now, immediately, we might not be able to move anything still. And that's because we're doing all this from a local script, right? But the player doesn't necessarily have the authority to move all of these parts. If I keep moving around them, I will probably eventually get permission to move them on the server. It will grant me ownership of them. But we want to speed up that process. We don't want to be waiting around. There we go. See, I've now got ownership of the thing. I can move it a little bit, but if I move away, then I lose ownership of it. So it says, no, put that thing back down. So in order to ensure that I have ownership, in fact, let me just show you what's happening. So you're not having to rely on my explanation. If I say are owners shown, I tick that. You can see these are black. They're all owned by the server. You can see that my character's green. And in order to take ownership of these parts, they need to be green as well. So it doesn't matter how many times I try and move it. If I don't have ownership, the server's not going to let me. Those little green flashes are telling me that I don't have ownership of it. And you can see now I've been moving around here for a little bit. It's actually given me ownership of these two, and they've just tapped into green, which means that now if I want to, I can start moving it about. But if I move away too much, well, they fall out of my sphere of influence. So in order to actually give me ownership of them, I need a server script. So let's create a script. We will call this drag handler. In order to communicate back and forth between the server and the client, we're obviously going to need a remote. So create a remote event, or in fact, actually, we're going to use a remote function. We'll name the function drag request. And the job of our drag handler script is simply processing those requests. Game.replicatorStorage.dragRequest.onServerInvoke equals a function which will have the player, the object that they want to drag, and then also whether they are requesting to pick it up. In fact, that's all getting a bit messy for the one line, isn't it? So let's just say local remote equals, and we can put that onto a second line. There we go. So first things first, if we have not been given an object, or that object maybe doesn't have a parent, if it's not inside the workspace, then we can just ignore it and forget about it. But otherwise, if they are requesting to pick up the item, then we want to make sure that someone else isn't already dragging it. Otherwise, everyone's going to be fighting over it. So to help us here, we can use an attribute. So let's say and object or and not. So the object does not have a attribute of dragged by. Okay, so it needs to be not being dragged by anyone. And in that case, we can then immediately set the attribute back, and we will assign the player's user ID. And then we need to set the network owner. Set network owner, and that's going to be the player that sent the remote. And because this is a remote function, we need to return back true to tell them it's successful. Now, the other condition is maybe they're carrying the item and they want to drop it. So else, if they're not requesting a pickup and it has an attribute that equals their player.user_ID, right? So you can't try and drop somebody else's object. So if that's the case, then we want to set both of these again. But this time, we want to set that to nil to allow another player to pick it up. And the network only want to set back to the server. Then we will return true. Otherwise, in condition that neither of these are true, well, we'll just return false. So just as a reminder, this is attempting to pick up, and this is requesting to drop. So that's our handling on the server. Now let's just go and do that on the client. So at the very top, we're going to need replicated storage, and then we'll get our drag remote from replicated storage. And I'm going to use wait for child because we are on the client, so we can't guarantee that everything's going to be loaded in. And once we've got that drag remote, down here, when we were just assuming that we'd grab the object, let's do a check first, where we can say ask the server if we're allowed to. So if drag remote, and we'll invoke the server, we want to send the target object, and true because we are requesting to pick it up. Now, if the server sends us back true, then we know that we have grabbed the item. And then we're going to need to invoke this again whenever we drop the object. So let's invoke the server again, but this time we'll want this to be false. And inside drop object function, let's just check that we actually do have a grabbed object. So if we don't, we can just ignore it. So now we play, we can see, again, I don't have ownership, but as soon as I click, it grants me ownership and I'm now dragging the part around. And it is at a set distance, which means that if I'm really close and I click the thing, it's going to go to there. And if I'm far away and I click the thing, it's going to come towards me, which you may want, which is perfectly fine. But I think it's kind of nice if it's the same distance you picked it up at. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm just going to keep a note of the distance of the object when they picked it up. So if we create a global for distance, initially that will be just 0. But when we get the target, we can calculate the distance here as well. So that's going to be equal to the origin of the ray minus the result.position, and then we'll get the magnitude. So now up here, instead of manually setting it to 5, we can use that distance value. So it's going to be minus distance. So now if I'm far away and I click it, it's going to stay far away and I can move it around however I like. And if I get in close, I can click it as well. And as soon as I drop it, the ownership goes back to the server and anyone else can pick it up. Pretty cool. We've got our working system. One thing you might want to do is disable collisions with the player to stop them like picking up themselves. You can use collision groups for that. But perhaps more importantly, you want to actually assign some values to all of these, because at the moment they're just like generic objects that we can pick up, which is great. But I want to be able to put my coal into my fuel burner, for example. So let's hit stop. We're going to get rid of all of these our owner shows things. And let's add some tags to all these. So coal, let's add a new tag and we'll call this flammable. Okay, so it's draggable and it's flammable. And then our gold bar, we're going to make this sellable. And then this pottery item is just kind of junk, right? You can't sell it. You can't put it in the engine. It's just like a random thing you can carry about if you want. And then I'm going to add a few more things into my billboard UI as well. Show you what that looks like for a second. So we've got these 3 different values: fuel, junk, valuable, just underneath the gold bar. Now, initially, we'll just set the flammable, the junk, and the sellable to all be invisible. And then we're going to toggle those on and off depending on what kind of object it is. So we'll move that billboard back into the script. And then inside of our highlight object, well, we can just do some pretty basic if statements. So is sellable is simply equal to whether that object has the tag is sellable. Actually, we didn't set it to is, did we? We simply set it to sellable. So like that. And is flammable, again, that's just equal to whether it has the tag of flammable. So the UI.txt.sellable.visible is decided by whether it has that tag. The UI.txt flammable is controlled by whether there is flammable. And the UI.txt junk, that's controlled by if it's not sellable and it's not flammable. And I'll just move this name one down here as well to keep things a little tidier. And so now we should see, yep, pottery is junk, coal is fuel, and the gold bar is valuable. Now we have those tags set up. It's pretty easy to reference those inside of our train handler. Now, previously, I was using this proximity prompt inside of the chimney, but I'm actually just going to go ahead and delete that now, and we're going to delete this line instead. We're going to write, we're going to say train, and we probably need a collider, in fact. So where we've got this Firebase, let's just duplicate that. and make this a nice big box around here. Okay, nice big box. You can adjust this however you like, but we'll call this the Firebox Collider. We'll make it invisible, and let's make sure that Can Collide is disabled. And we don't need any of these sounds or particle emitters, but we do want to make sure that it has at least one weld connecting to the platform, which it does. So now we have this Firebox Collider, we can react to when these parts touch this part. So in our train handler, it's train.firebox collider. We just use a basic touched event, connect that into a function which will give us the name of the part. And if that part has the tag of flammable, then we probably want to just go ahead and destroy the part, but then we will add the fuel. And you could set a custom amount of fuel. Maybe that could be an additional attribute, or you have it in a table somewhere. But for now, we'll just add a generic fuel amount of, say, 5. So let's make our start fuel equal to just 3. And we've got a little bit of fuel, but if I pick up my coal and I start dragging it, maybe we'd like to make this drag a little bit faster. We can do that pretty easily if we just set the value of the align position. At the moment, the responsiveness is 10. If we just bump that up to like 40, what we'll see then is when we drag it around, it's a little bit snappier. But anyway, if we drag the coal up here into the firebox, there we go. And we can see my fuel is now way more than before, allowing me to travel even further. So cool. There we go. We have our working dragging system. We can upgrade our train. We're adding in the fuel, and we can even go and if we walk all the way back to here, we can collect some generic pottery junk and even the classic gold bar. There we have it. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you want to get some help with this, you can check out our Discord server. Link will be in the description. And of course, you can get all the project files and scripts from this video over on my website if you're a member of the GnomeCode Academy. So head over to gnomecode.com to check that out. But until next time, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye!